The food service, hospitality, and retail industries are evolving in ways you've never heard of until now. Hosted by global industry technovator Rob Grimes and powered by the IFBTA, TechBytes is your go-to podcast, putting technology innovation and trends on the menu.
Well, welcome to another edition of TechBytes here at the National Restaurant Association show in Chicago at McCormick Place. And I am really pleased to have with me Chad Moutray, who is the chief economist of the National Restaurant Association.
Yes, I'm happy to be here.
And this is your show.
Yeah.
So you should be very happy to be here.
It's fun to be here, yeah. It's my third show.
It is your third show, but
yeah.
What is that like when they call it sort of like a constant listener, first-time caller or whatever that is? This is the first time we've been on a podcast together, right?
It is, yeah.
Because we've spoken together a lot, and we actually met, I think the first time was Nipsey a year ago and then the table, right?
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
So it's a great partnership where the IFBTA and the National Restaurant Association work together.
Yeah.
And a couple years ago, actually, your predecessor, Hudson, was on this. And it was very interesting because tech and research and things seem to go hand in hand.
Yeah. I mean, when you think about all that restaurants are having to do to mitigate some of those rising costs, you have to think about technology and innovation, right? And so I think that's the real good link between the two of us.
Okay, so if it's your third show, and we've talked for a couple years now, it's almost 2 years, on different things, one might ask, why haven't we been on a podcast together? I do have an answer for this.
I don't know. That's a good question. But certainly I've been clamoring to be on this show. So
clamoring, okay. Well, here's the real reason why. Because what I've learned is you are very smart and you have a lot of data and you actually know how to put it together. And I've been following you on LinkedIn and I've been taking a look at some of the presentations you do at other industries there. Yeah. And I figured if I have you on here, you're too smart for me on this one. So
thank you for the
we're going to have the conversation. Okay, because I think if we put our heads together on this, it's going to work out. So first of all, in your role for the association, what is it that you would tell somebody if they sat next to you on a plane and they know everybody eats, but they might not know the association. So what would you tell them that it is your job to do?
Well, my job is I'm a talking head, right? So when it comes to the overall economy, what's happening with restaurants, how are they feeling? What are they thinking about? What are the challenges? It's really to be able to talk about just, I'm a macroeconomic talking head, but I'm also a thought leader, right? And I speak for the industry. Right? So I need to understand really what's happening in the sector, talk to as many operators as possible to be able to speak with some authority there.
So obviously we're going to talk about technology. However, before we do that, what would you say is the main thoughts and the main talking things that keep coming up this year?
Oh, yeah. The math is difficult, right? When you talk to a lot of operators right now, they're getting squeezed, right? I mean, we know that the typical profit margin is 2.8% for a full service restaurant, 4% for a limited service restaurant. And I suspect that's getting squeezed even further. 42% of restaurants weren't profitable last year, right? And so as you've seen food costs go up, labor costs go up, swipe fees, everything's gone up, right? Overall operators that I talk to continue to tell me that it's difficult, right? Doesn't mean that there are not people getting into this business. Doesn't mean that people aren't still going out to eat, but it's a difficult business. And I think that's something I think people should know more about is just there's a romanticism about opening up restaurants, right? That, everyone wants to open up a restaurant, but
everybody wants to be in the restaurant business and everybody eats. Yeah. But it's like the restaurant business is like the entertainment business. Yeah. And that's why you see so many sports figures, so many actors and actresses being in it. But in reality, this particular business, by the way, dentists are a great group of people who seem to invest in restaurants. I don't know why that is, but they seem to invest. But everybody wants to be in the restaurant business. Yeah. So when you talk about how difficult it is, obviously you're in between a lot of different things, right? It's a manufacturing plant that has a resource that does, in fact, wear out. There's a time limit to the resource. It has labor in it, a heavy labor component. And you have also this other thing called guests.
Oh, yeah.
And you try to balance those things in there. but it's always been the thing about food costs, labor costs, but it's operating cost as well. So when you say that they're getting squeezed, what's going on right now that's actually pushing that?
Well, we've seen overall labor costs go up about 35%. Food costs are up about 40%, really, since the pandemic. But it's not just those two, right? We know that like I said a second ago, all those other costs are going up as well. At the same time, you're facing a consumer where consumer confidence is at an all-time low. They say, no more price increases, right? They're frustrated with inflation. And so you have a lot of restaurants who say, I need to be able to pass on some of these costs to my consumers, but I'm worried already about traffic concerns. And so there's a hesitance there. Right?
Traffic concerns meaning more people coming in the door and repeat business.
That's right. So they need more butts and seats. They need more sales, right? And so traffic has been a challenge really for the last couple of years. And so some restaurants are able to pass on those costs. Many are worried about it because they don't want to exacerbate those traffic trends that were already
So if we talk about how do you measure the success in the industry, if you were just putting it out there, what are the key metrics that you would say? I mean, I always thought, table turn, if you're an operator, right? Table turn, average check average.
That's right.
Right. So what are the key metrics that people are looking at?
Average check is a key one, right? So when, obviously we're looking at same store sales and traffic, but when I talk to operators, they're always looking at that average check, right? So I think that's part of it. The other part of it is when companies are looking at seeing how they can turn around some of those challenging environment trends, right? How do you get back to basics, right? Why do you go to restaurants to begin with, right? It's to have those big occasions, to have the experience. You want to be waited on. You want to have that level of hospitality, right? You want to make sure I'm getting a great meal, something I can't fix at home, maybe, right? To celebrate with friends and family. We want things as basic as, are the bathrooms clean? Am I getting waited on and getting greeted in that right way? So many of the restaurants that I talk to are really doubling down on the basics, right? As part of that value conversation, right? Is to be able to turn that around. It's not just a conversation about price. And they're hoping that by doubling down on the basics, they can try to turn around those average check trends, et cetera.
So, boy, I wish I had a bubble above my head right now because I'm sitting here thinking about how many different subjects you just brought. And I'm now trying to remember in my head what I'm going to ask you about because there are a number of key factors here.
Yeah.
So I interviewed somebody, an independent entrepreneur in, I think it was Scranton, Pennsylvania, who had a Greek diner.
Yeah.
And I interviewed him somewhere in the last year. But this guy came from retail. Now, I thought it was very interesting because retailers think about the cost or the revenue per square foot, which is not what restaurateurs do. However, the thought occurs to me that even here at this show, when I think about the new venues and the new places that food service and restaurants are showing up, which includes vending, which includes micro markets, which includes, in retail stores, right? Which is why we have a partnership with the NRF as well. So we're taking a look at that. That idea of revenue per square foot might in fact be a metric we should be using, because how do you measure a restaurateur that goes in a micro market or goes into a fresh food vending? That is going to be revenue per square foot in there. But yet I never hear that talked about in the restaurant industry.
So I actually have. I've talked to some operators. I know one particular one, I won't name the brand, who said that they opened up a facility, a restaurant that was too big. Right. And if they had just kept it the right size, right, that revenue per square foot, they might have been a little bit more successful. So it is something I think that operators are thinking about, even though it's not part of our common parlance.
But you know what? Maybe it should be. No, seriously. Maybe it should be, because one of the metrics, because I'm always looking for ways to say, how can we teach people the new metrics of how they should operate, right? And obviously we're going to be talking about technology. We're getting there, right? I'm setting you up, by the way.
I know.
So we're going to get there. However, I do think that concept, that was an aha moment for me when he said that. And I thought, okay, because he was talking about trying to teach their servers that you have a certain number of feet that you work within, otherwise known as a station, right? And so if you have a station, a certain number of feet, and you try to teach your servers, because it's always tough to teach them about upselling or being able to position things right. By the way, technology can help them to do that. But if they realize that they're being measured by the amount of square feet that they work within, I just thought that was an interesting way of looking at it, and a different way of teaching them, how to increase your check average, right?
And one of the things that we've looked at in the last year is understaffing, right? I just wrote a paper on staffing. And when you're understaffed, right? You know this because we've seen a lot of instances of understaffing since the pandemic. They have to close off whole areas, right? Maybe you don't have enough hostesses or waitresses or not enough chefs. And that square footage becomes something that really becomes a liability, right? You can't.
Absolutely.
You have tables that are empty that aren't being served.
So
right?
some of the solutions that end up on that, and we are going to talk about the labor and the staffing piece because I took a look at that report that came out. And of course, technology plays a role in each area, but I don't believe that technology, it's the enabler, not the answer, right? I mean, it's not, you're not going to go, well, there are people who are building restaurants based solely on technology. That's a whole different ballgame, right? But when you take a look at that, there's a few things. First of all, it's funny because when I did run restaurants, and I'm a restaurant manager by background, by the way, I found it amazing that your CEO, Michelle Horsmel, when she sat on a stage a year ago and I heard her use the term dub-dub, and I knew that went to Fridays, and I'm like, oh my gosh, she worked in the industry. I thought that was actually pretty cool. Because you understand that being a server, right? And I understand that being a manager. But when you think about it, people always open up restaurants, and when they start to expand, like the fourth or fifth restaurant is like 3 times the size of the original one. And then they figure out what they should have done, and they should have just stuck with the size of the original one. I don't know why that is.
That's the example I gave you.
That's like the dentist doing that too, right? Okay. So we take a look at operating costs. So there's, your CapEx, which you were talking about when you're building, right? Now, by the way, it used to be the technology fit into the CapEx up front because you were buying your equipment. Today, in the models of software as a service, hardware as a service, it becomes everybody who's here is selling because all these payment companies or credit card companies went ahead and bought point of sale companies. It's a different model, right? So that becomes an operating cost, which starts building up, because you can only have so many of those that fit together. So that is a challenge. I have found that people, so on the labor piece, because we're going to transition into that. Somebody asked me yesterday about this. I said, when the economy is bad, people invest in technology to control costs. When the economy is good, people invest in technology to build sales. So that's when you have your startups doing, a lot of the things that are there. So either way, technology somehow wins. So if we talk about labor, okay, it is a key component in the operating costs. So you guys did a whole study on this. So what were the key bullet point findings, and how did that fit in there?
We know that whenever labor costs exceed 40% of your overall sales, that's where profitability becomes a challenge, right? And so when you can look at your overall...
So what is the right mix, by the way? Is it a third, a third, a third? What,
it's about a third,
Okay. All right. So
32%, roughly.
All right. So, okay. So a third, because that's what I was, a third, a third, a third. So, okay. So food costs, well, mixed beverage in there, but it does. Okay. So whenever it gets up to about 40% or so.
There's a high correlation that profitability is a challenge, right? So we put those out there, not necessarily as benchmarks, but we can certainly learn from examples of who's doing, what are some lessons that can be learned here when you're looking at some of those overall P&L line items. And labor, again, labor is one of the bigger challenges. When I talk to operators now, you've seen some relief on the food costs, but labor is really, you're still seeing some pretty solid growth of labor costs really over the last few years.
So if we break up labor, right, you got the cost of acquisition of candidates, right? You have the onboarding process, the training process in there. You've got the labor, you got the training cost of the labor, and making sure that they're following the standards. And then turnover, which has always been, like the big thing. So do you guys, your report broke it down into different areas.
So we know the average turnover rate in restaurants is 122%. That means in a typical year, you're turning over your restaurant, you're hiring all new people, right? One of the things that we looked at was, number one, understaffing and the challenges that presents, right? There's hundreds of thousands of dollars when you are understaffed in terms of the lost sales, in terms of clients, your customers not being happy.
They're not going to have repeat business.
Morale for your overall employees, et cetera. So that's one thing we looked at was what is the true cost of being understaffed? The other part of it is, what is this magic number, right? When do you become net positive? You devoted an awful lot of resources when you're hiring somebody, right? So you have to post it up online, right? You've got to have a lot of manager time to interview and do all that stuff. Then you hire someone, you've got to orient them, you've got to train them. And there's a certain magic point where you start actually making money on that, right? Where they actually start adding productivity. That's more than likely happening within the first 30 days. And so what are you doing to really invest in your workforce, right, that are coming in to make sure that you can keep them, right? Because if you lose someone before that point, you've lost money, right?
And what is the percentage of people that in the industry at one time or another worked in the food service industry?
We know that half of all Americans got their first job at a restaurant, including me, right?
Where did you work?
I worked, I started off at frying chicken.
For?
A famous recipe in Mattoon, Illinois. And then I went to basically a sit-down dining place.
So you know what a henny penny is?
I do.
Okay, yeah. I had that conversation the other night. I actually know how to clean a henny penny, right?
And if you add anyone who's had any experience in a restaurant, it's 2/3 of all Americans have worked in a restaurant, right? And so, and the other key thing here, and this is something we stress, and you know this, is that we are the training ground for everybody, right? Like I didn't stick in restaurants, right?
Okay.
But you learn some valuable skills as a teenager of how to deal with difficult people, right? How to deal with clients who might want something different, right? How to really deal in stressful situations. And I worry that as fewer teenagers are getting some of those jobs now, we know that, the unemployment rate of most teenagers is high, or people are just not doing it. You worry, where are they going to get those basic skills, right? Is it going to be after college? And how are they going to deal with difficult people once you get into the actual?
Well, people always say that life is perfect without customers and employees.
Yeah.
But we are in that people business, but those people, the people business we're in is both the employees and the customers. So let's just take a quick break, and then I want to continue on this particular discussion. So we're having a conversation here at the National Restaurant Association show here in Chicago at McCormick Place, and I have Chad Moutray, who is the chief economist for the National Restaurant Association, so no better person to be talking to about this in the industry and everything surrounding us at the annual event. So we'll be right back and continue the conversation.
With the rapid expansion of technology in the food and beverage industries, finding the right supplier can become overwhelming and complicated. To simplify this process, the IFBTA created Exchange. Exchange is a powerful search tool where users can easily narrow down their technology search and refine results by application type, geography served, department, and more. Browse resources and learn more about the industry's technology suppliers at exchange.ifbta.org. Now, back to the show.
So welcome back to TechBytes, and we're here at the National Restaurant Association show in Chicago at McCormick Place, and Chad Moutray, who's the chief economist of the National Restaurant Association. So this is the annual event that brings the whole industry and globally together, from all segments. But right before the break, we were talking about the employee piece of it, bringing them on, but also it is a first experience for a job in there. And I'd like to just throw something in to this particular conversation because it was an aha moment somewhere in the last year or so. If you take a look at technology and you take a look at our guests, and you take a look at the younger guests who are sitting there with their families or with each other, they don't look up. Mm-hmm. They're on their phones. They're texting each other, even though they're sitting at the meal, right? Yeah. They're taking pictures, and the communication skills are lost. Mm-hmm. And you talked about you going to work with a chicken restaurant and how it was your first skill and how do you transfer. Well, we have an additional responsibility because we may, in fact, teach people how to communicate and not only interact with each other, but interact with human beings, even before they go to college, right? Where they may not interact with anybody either. So how does that play into this when you not only are going to have to teach them skills in working in our industry, but now you have to teach them how to actually interact with other people?
I think that's a challenge, right? I think that, even with my own son, you got to limit that screen time, right? And so, how
old's your son?
He's 13.
Right? 13.
So we always say, go out and play with some other kids, right? And they would rather just play games, right? So I think that is a challenge, right? Is of number one, they're coming with tech skills that you and I didn't have. As I'm putting words in your mouth, right? We went out and played and did stuff, right? We went out and till it turned dark, right? In terms of going out and being around people and engaging people. We've got to find ways to find students. I teach at George Washington University, right? How can you make students communicate as much as you can, get away from their phones, get away from AI a little bit, to be able to communicate in a way that anyone can understand?
Or maybe teach them to use what they're doing in a way that's positive.
On the other side, and I used to be the chief economist at the National Association of Manufacturers, so I wrote quite a bit about this generational difference there's a lot that older workers can learn from younger workers and vice versa, right? And so we've got to find ways to create teams that are diverse in terms of age, in terms of other aspects of diversity, so that we can all learn from each other. There's a lot that people in Gen X and boomers can learn from younger in terms of some of those tech skills and vice versa. And so that's not always easy to do in a sector which tends to skew younger.
But it's very difficult to teach people communication skills.
That is true.
That is a little bit different. I think there's some very large companies that have learned that lesson because they put too much technology in and took away even the communication between the employees, much less the guest, right? Because if you have a tableside kiosk where you don't even actually have to talk to somebody, or whatever, but the idea generational is sort of an interesting thing too, because it's two-sided. You have the guest who's generational, who needs to be able to use technology, and it's what level are they at? But you have the employee as well. And that is a challenge in the workforce because we are a great employer of people of all ages.
Yes. And I think, at the end of the day, we can't forget that we're in the hospitality business, right? And so tech is great. You and I both love. I'm excited about the technology that's coming out. But there's a fine line between, again, why do you go to restaurants? I want to be waited on. I want someone to be hospitable to me, right? And so you've got to find that line. And I think customers in general, of all generations, are pretty accepting of technology, but they're not going to do it at the cost of poor service, right?
You know why this is such a great industry? And, look, I've been able to marry the two things that I love. One is technology and the other is the restaurant food service industry. So, and I'm still an operator just in tech. When I look at that and I think what made this industry different, whether it's the independent entrepreneur, the startup, the SMB, or they become a large chain or they grow internationally at 20 units, it is the culture and it is the personality of the operation. And the challenge is not to lose that culture as they grow. And I actually think that technology may help them to do that just as much as people may say it's going to hurt it. Right? It's how you infuse that culture in there, in the training, the way they serve their food, how they come up with the different pieces, right?
And that comes down to a great manager, right? How are you managing your restaurant? What is the overall culture like? I mean, that goes into retention as well. Great, people don't quit their jobs because, they quit their jobs because of the manager, right? That's kind of a cliche. But you also see when you move a manager to a different location, people follow them if they're a great one, right? But that embrace of technology and the comfort level there, that if you're a manager and you're telling your workers how important that technology is and why you're doing it up front, that you're doing it to make their life better, to make them more productive. It's not to take away their job. It's to actually find ways to make them more efficient. And I think that culture kind of it permeates throughout the organization.
I find it interesting when I talk to franchisees, especially the ones who are in franchise business that they have one or two units, right? Not people that have big units of franchisees, because a lot of times they may or may not embrace technology, and the franchisor always has that problem of convincing them to invest in it, like they convince them to invest in a fryer, your henny penny, right? So they have a hard time doing that. Today, maybe not so much. However, if you want to attract good employees and you want to attract great management, and you know that they're already using technology and tools, you have to actually be employing technology as a asset to get them to join you. And so there's probably some middle ground there that you need to do it. But also now you get into this whole thing of the labor force. What do we get accused? Collective industry, get accused of when we start talking about AI. They talk about, you're going to get rid of the jobs. You're going to get rid of this. I don't actually look at it that way. I look at it that it's going to enhance it and give people a better tool to be able to operate, but we're still not going to take the hospitality out of it. However, I can remember 15, 20 years ago getting called up by a TV station, being asked to what I thought, because two major chains were going to go ahead and use voice over power over Ethernet to take orders at call centers for the drive-through. Now we're talking about having actual kiosks and things with taking orders right on the phone, pizza orders on the phone, and people are okay with it because the rest of people are doing that, right? So how do we fight that middle ground that's in there where people are accusing us of putting it into reduce workers when we're actually saying, no, we want to,
What I've heard is that operators are implementing these technologies, but that's freeing up people who would have done that to do. They can go in and make sure everyone's, customer service is improved. Maybe they're back in the kitchen now, making sure that throughput continues to increase and you get that order out faster, right? So you're freeing up labor to do other parts of making sure customers are happy. And I think if you communicate that up front, that's what you're doing it for, right? It's not about limiting workers. There's always been fears about technology taking away workers, right? Again, in the manufacturing sector, I face the same challenge, right? The reality is that you're simply making workers more efficient. When you think about the hiring process, when you speed up the hiring, right? This was in the staffing paper. You freed up the manager to do what they really were intended to do,
and
which is
get
manage
good
the
employees
restaurant
in the first place, right? Because sourcing the right employee for your culture has been tough, and you can use those tools to do it. By the way, I could see us having a separate chat about manufacturing.
Oh, yeah.
Because we are really manufacturing units as well, and it's coming together more and more with robotics, and that probably your lessons learned from that industry could play really well into this as.
So Hudson, you mentioned Hudson earlier, my predecessor. One of the things he always told me was I was perfect for this role because restaurants now have become mini manufacturers.
They are.
Right? And so, yes, to your point, that's something I've heard.
Wow, Hudson called you perfect. That's great.
Oh,
that's really very good. But I'm telling you, I think that could be a separate conversation in own because we draw from those things. So what is the class that you teach at George Washington?
I teach econometrics, so statistics in the Masters of Applied Economics program.
Okay. So you use that obviously all the time in your day job, but you're teaching it in general.
That's right.
Okay. So there's a lot of information that's available out there. So if you took your hat off of what you do day in and day out for the association, and you were to say, how can restaurateurs themselves use what you're teaching in the class of what's now available to them? What advice would you give them to something that's readily available they don't think about?
Restaurants are using data like they've never have before, right? You know this. And so particularly if you have a large number of restaurants, they have dashboards now that show here's an underperforming store, right? And at this underperforming store, you can see that retention's not great. There's a whole series of other things. And now I know, as someone who's leading that restaurant, I need to devote more resources to that store, right? It doesn't mean that that's a bad manager necessarily. It means we need to devote some more resources. These others are doing really great. Continue doing what you're doing. And so these dashboards can be very helpful in terms of seeing and looking at that bigger picture of where do I need to devote some extra resources? How can I use my time to make sure that underperforming store can turn that around? So I think that's a large part of it. The other part of it as an economist is we deal in these large data vacuums right now, right? The data that we're dealing with is old when we get it, right? And so how can we get more real-time data?
Why would it be old? We have real-time data today.
Well, we have real-time data from the point-of-sale systems, but when you're looking at government data, it's old, right? So we just got retail sales last week. It was for April. And in times of change, right? Is that totally accurate? I think one of the frustrations I've seen...
But I'm missing something there. When you're saying that you got retail data that's old, but how does that apply to what you do for the industry day in and day out?
I've got to figure out what is the gap there, right? We know what happened with retail sales in April, for instance, but now we're in the middle of May, right?
Right.
In times of change, we're in the middle of the Iran war, right? So there's been times in the last couple months where I've had to ask, what's really happening with sales? Are people pulling back because of gas prices? And there's other times, since the pandemic, we've dealt with this a lot. When you're dealing with data that's often lagged by several weeks from government statistical agencies, how can I fill those gaps, right? So regression might be part of it, but the other part of it is going out and talking to actual restaurant operators,
absolutely.
right?
Well, that's what you did in the report you were doing.
And so I have a sounding board, which I regularly reach out to and say, what are you seeing? What's happening on the ground, right? I know what I'm seeing in the official data, but is that accurate, right? And so having that way to check, right, on what's happening, especially in those moments where things are changing very rapidly, and I feel that the data that I'm getting is old, then I need to be able to fill in those gaps. Let me just ask
you a fundamental question on this, because I think I'm reading into something. I want to make sure that I got this one right.
Yeah.
In the old days, which weren't so long ago, people always put the food service industry under retail. So if I went to any major corporation who wasn't making food service technology in itself, any of them, IBM, Microsoft, whatever, they always put the hotel industry under travel, and they always put the food service industry under retail. Does the government put out data that is specific to the food service industry, or are we lumped under retail?
No, we get it. There are some times when we are lumped together with hotels, so it's food service and accommodation. But oftentimes, I'm able to break out full service, limited service, and even other, right? So there's a lot of data on it. What I'm saying is, not that I'm questioning the data, it's just in times of uncertainty, I need to fill in those gaps to make sure.
But you're the spokesperson for the industry on this, letting people know what that data is from big and small, so, but you have certain data sources that are coming in, but we have our own set of data as well.
Yeah. I want to make sure that I'm talking for the industry, I'm actually speaking accurately, right? And sometimes official data, which are looking more in the aggregate, don't get into the level of detail that I really need, right? Or I just want to validate that what I'm saying is accurate. And so, that's even more important in these times when you know that the data you're getting are already a little old, right? And so you almost feel like that's a time capsule, right? You're like, we'll get some data, and you're like, oh, well, that was great, but these things have happened since then. What's really happened?
So here's what I got, and unfortunately, we're going to have to wrap up on this, but I'm going to leave you with a parting thought, an idea. Okay, based on what you've said. Well, you haven't heard it yet, so you don't know if you're going to like it or not. But so you teach a class on econometrics, which, by the way, I think when I was in school, I had to take it 3 times to get through it once. I wasn't very good at that. Okay, probably better today. And for the association, you are the spokesperson pulling the data and research and really putting it out there and say, this is what it really means to us. This is our data, right?
Yeah.
And you have your group of people, your go-to people. Are you also participating in figuring out how the association would teach the industry how to use the data?
Well, I think we need to do a better job of that. I think one of the things that one of my goals is we're putting out all this data. What does that mean for you as a typical restaurant operator, right? And I think that's a large part of the research insights that I've been starting to do a little bit more. I want to continue to beef that up, right? Am I teaching you to do regression? No, but I'm at least trying to say, here are some data points. Here's some thought leadership that we're putting out there. Okay, now what? What does that mean for you, right? And I think the more of that we can do, the more we can be helpful for restaurants, right? I think that's really the bottom line of why it matters.
So I have an idea.
Yeah.
And I do know that we're recording this, so we can cut this out. We can cut this out later.
I'm on the record, yeah.
Yeah, you're gonna be. Well, no, you're not on the record because nobody's on the record unless it's just an idea.
Okay.
Right. So we position the IFBTA as the connector, right, between technology and the operators, big and small, the independent up to the main chain, and then internationally, right?
Yeah.
And the reason we do that, and I tell this to people all the time, is because we can talk to the technology people on one side, but we actually speak the language of the operator so that you can translate how that works. But in this day and age with AI and all this data, as you're talking about, you actually are the connector on the other side that knows where to find that data. I always spend these hours on things that I'm doing for myself. And then when I finally figure it out, it's only because I didn't know where to find it, right? I didn't know how to ask the question. But you actually know how to ask the question. I think what would be a really fun thing to do sometime is to actually sit there and say, why don't we get together and talk about this and figure out, because you know where to find the data. We know how to bring the technology together and get that group that has the operator in there, the technology in there, and the data in there together to figure out actually how to make it actionable and teach that class for the operator. Because I just think, and by the way, these vendors would buy off on that too, because they don't know what to do with it either. I just think you have that knowledge.
Anytime I put out any data, like I do a Friday email to some of our members. They love it, right? They just, they see it in the Wall Street Journal maybe or on CNBC, but I think having it specific to restaurants is something that's very
but I'm not talking about putting on industry data. I'm talking about teaching the class, that I think just would be a very interesting way of doing that. So anyway, with that idea,
we will have to
whether official or not, he's not on the record for it. We're just having a conversation. So we're good. So it's been a pleasure, having Chad Moutray here at the Restaurant Association show in Chicago, McCormick Center. And, it's just a pleasure to have this. And I know we're going to have those other conversations as well, putting it all together in there. But having your thought leadership for the industry, it's great having you on TechBytes.
So this is the first of many, I'm sure, Rob.
Many conversations on and off.
Yes.
So thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
This podcast is brought to you by the International Food and Beverage Technology Association. The IFBTA is the industry's voice of food service, hospitality, and retail technology, providing thought leadership as your single, impartial, and go-to resource. The IFBTA offers in-person and online communities to connect with your peers, the exchange, an all-encompassing global technology resource, and an industry-wide professional education and certification program. The bottom line is the IFBTA is your place to gather, learn, and share in conversations like the one we're having today. Thank you for joining us on this episode of TechBytes, powered by the IFBTA. I'm Rob Grimes, your host, and I look forward to taking our next bite of technology together.